My name is Sarah, I'm 62 years old, and the night before my only son's wedding, his fiancée banned me from their future family. Before I tell you about the dusty box I found in my basement that blew her whole secret life wide open, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. It all started on what was supposed to be one of the happiest nights of my life. My whole world for the past 35 years had been my son, Ethan. I'm a retired nurse from Cleveland, Ohio, and I raised that boy on my own since he was 7, after my husband passed. Every scraped knee, every late-night study session, every ounce of my being was poured into making sure he grew up to be a good, honorable man. And he did. He became a lawyer, hardworking and kind, and I couldn't have been prouder. The night before the wedding, I drove over to the fancy restaurant in Chagrin Falls where they were having the rehearsal dinner. The air was buzzing with excitement. I wasn't staying for the dinner, they had their own plans, but I had something special to deliver. For months I had been working on a scrapbook, bound in beautiful blue leather, just like the color of Ethan's eyes when he was a baby. It was filled with everything. His first steps, his toothy grin in his kindergarten photo, the day he got his driver's license, his law school graduation. It was more than just paper and pictures. It was a testament to a life built on love and sacrifice. My love, my sacrifice. I wanted his new wife, Chloe, to have it, to see the boy I raised before he became the man she was about to marry. I saw her near the entrance talking with some friends. She was stunning, I'll give her that. She wore a sleek, ivory-colored dress that probably cost more than my first car, her blonde hair perfectly styled. But her smile, it never quite reached her eyes. When she saw me, she excused herself and walked over, gliding across the floor like she owned the place. "Mrs. Miller," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "So glad you could make it." It was the same polite, distant tone she always used with me. "I didn't want to interrupt," I said, holding out the heavy album. "I just wanted to drop this off for you and Ethan. I thought you might enjoy looking through it tonight." She didn't even glance at it. Instead, she stepped closer, her expensive perfume hitting me in a wave. She leaned in as if to give me a hug, but her lips were right next to my ear. Her voice dropped to a venomous whisper, a sound so cold it sent a shiver down my spine. "After tomorrow," she breathed, "you are not part of this family anymore." The air left my lungs. My ears started ringing, and for a second I thought I'd misheard. I pulled back, my face a mask of confusion. I'm sorry, what did you say?" Her eyes, a pale chilly blue, stared right into mine. There was no mistaking the look in them. It was pure contempt. "You heard me," she whispered again, a faint, cruel smirk playing on her perfect lips. "You've done your role. You raised him. Now he's my husband, my family. We're starting our own life, and frankly, you're just extra baggage. So please do us all a favor. Don't show up tomorrow and embarrass us." It felt like a punch to the gut. The heavy album in my hand suddenly felt like it was made of lead. I just stood there, speechless, my heart hammering against my ribs. 30 years of my life flashed before my eyes. The double shifts at the hospital until my feet were raw. Turning down a nursing promotion so I could be home to help Ethan with his homework. Using the small inheritance from my parents to start his college fund instead of fixing the leaky roof over my own head. All of it, every single sacrifice, every quiet prayer for his happiness. All of it was just to be called baggage by this woman. She saw the look on my face and had the audacity to pat my arm. A condescending little gesture. "Honestly, Sarah," she said, using my first name for the first time ever as if we were friends. "It's for the best. Ethan loves you, but love makes people blind. I see things clearly. You don't fit into the future we're building." She watched me, that perfect, empty smile plastered on her face, expecting me to crumble, to just turn around and disappear like she wanted. And for a second I almost did. But then I looked down at the album in my hands, at the photo of a 7-year-old Ethan beaming on his first day of school. The boy I gave up everything for. A cold fire started burning in my chest, a feeling I hadn't felt in 30 years. I took a slow breath, clutched the leather cover until my knuckles were white, and I opened my mouth to speak. I didn't say a word. What was there to say? Arguing with a person like that is like trying to reason with a brick wall. All the anger, all the shock, it just coalesced into a single cold point of clarity in my chest. I pulled the scrapbook back, holding it tight against my body as if it were a shield. I looked her right in the eye, and for the first time she was the one who flinched. I gave her a small, tight nod. Thank you for your honesty, Chloe, I said, my voice dangerously calm. You've made things perfectly clear. Then I turned around and walked away without looking back, leaving her standing there in the warm glow of the restaurant. The drive home was a blur. The streets of Cleveland, the familiar turns toward my quiet neighborhood, they were all just shapes moving past my window. The scrapbook sat on the passenger seat, its cheerful blue leather cover now feeling like a cruel joke, a monument to a lifetime of love that had just been declared worthless. When I finally parked in my own driveway, I couldn't bring myself to get out of the car. I just sat there in the dark, the engine ticking as it cooled, replaying her words over and over in my head. Baggage. You're not part of this family. Don't embarrass us. Each word was a fresh wound. When I got inside, the silence was deafening. This little house, the one I'd filled with the smell of baking cookies and the sound of Ethan practicing his trumpet for the school band, suddenly felt like an empty, hollow shell. I walked straight to my bedroom and placed the album under my bed, pushing it deep into the darkness where I couldn't see it. I didn't cry. It was a pain that was too deep for tears, a cold, heavy stone settling in the pit of my stomach. I just sat on the edge of my bed in the dark, in my nice dress that I'd worn to be dismissed, feeling the weight of every single year pressing down on me. I must have fallen asleep in my clothes because the next thing I knew, pale morning light was filtering through the blinds. For a fleeting, merciful moment, my body moved on autopilot. It was the wedding day. A jolt of excitement, a lifetime of maternal programming shot through me. I stood up, walked to my closet and saw it hanging there. The pale blue dress I'd bought months ago. Ethan had been with me when I bought it. A rare afternoon we'd managed to steal for ourselves. "Mom, that color looks beautiful on you," he'd said, his eyes shining with a pride that made my heart swell. Seeing it now felt like a knife twisting in my gut. I slammed the closet door shut, the sound echoing in the silent house. That was the moment. That was the turning point. Sitting there at my small kitchen table, staring at the steam rising from a coffee mug I didn't even want, I made the most selfish and the most necessary decision of my life. For 35 years, every choice I made had Ethan at its center. Every extra shift, every passed over vacation, every penny saved. But not today. Today, for the first time, I wasn't going to put my son first. I was choosing myself, my dignity, my self-respect. I was not going to sit in a church pew, a polite, smiling prop in her perfect production, and watch the boy I raised pledge his life to a woman who had already erased me from his. I was not going. At 8 a.m. my phone sitting on the counter started buzzing, and it didn't stop. A text from Ethan. "Morning, Mom. Big day. See you at the church soon." My thumb hovered over the screen. I could type a lie. "Not feeling well, honey. So sorry." But I couldn't. I couldn't bring myself to lie for her, to cover for her cruelty. So I did nothing. An hour later, another text. "Hey, where are you? Everyone's starting to get here." Then a third, this one laced with a frantic energy I could feel through the screen. "Mom, please answer. Chloe said you weren't feeling well last night, but I know that's not true. Is everything okay?" Each message was a fresh stab of guilt, a temptation to give in, to just go and smooth things over for his sake. But it was overshadowed by the memory of Chloe's cold smirk. At 10 a.m., there was a frantic pounding on my front door. It was my younger sister, Karen, her face flushed, already in her lavender bridesmaid dress. "Sarah, what in God's name are you doing?" she demanded, storming inside. "You're not even dressed. The ceremony starts in an hour. Ethan's been calling me, worried sick. He says you won't answer your phone." I just shook my head slowly, my gaze fixed on a point on the far wall. "I'm not going, Karen." Her jaw dropped. "Not going? Are you insane? It's your only son's wedding day. Whatever petty squabble you had with Chloe, you need to swallow your pride and be there for him." That's when I finally looked at her, and she must have seen the raw, bottomless pain in my eyes, because her own expression softened. "It wasn't a petty squabble," I said, my voice trembling for the first time that day. "She told me to my face that I am not part of his family anymore. She told me not to come." The anger drained from Karen's face, replaced by utter disbelief. "She what? No, Sarah, you must have misunderstood her. Chloe can be blunt, but—" "I didn't misunderstand a thing," I said, the words spilling out now, hot and bitter. She leaned in and whispered it in my ear like a secret execution. She called me baggage. She said I would embarrass them. She doesn't want me there, Karen. So why should I go? Why should I sit there and be a part of her lie, pretending we are one big happy family, while she's already planned my funeral and her new life? Why should I validate her victory? My sister sank into a kitchen chair, speechless. She knew me. She knew I had swallowed my pride for Ethan 1,000 times over the years. For me to do this, it had to be something terrible, something unforgivable. Oh my God, she whispered, her hand covering her mouth. That little monster. I never liked her. So let them blame me, I said, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. Let them say I abandoned him. I've been judged my whole life, ever since Mark died and I became a single working mom. What's one more day of judgment? As the church bells began to ring in the distance, a strange, defiant calm washed over me. I thought this was the end of my story. A mother too broken and too proud to attend her own son's wedding. I couldn't have been more wrong. The clock on the wall ticked past 11, each tick a hammer blow marking the moment the ceremony was supposed to begin. I imagined Ethan standing at the altar in his perfectly tailored suit, his face a mask of confusion and worry, scanning the crowd for me. I imagined Chloe, radiant and triumphant in her white gown, walking down the aisle to claim her prize. The thought was unbearable. I got up, walked over to the counter, and unplugged my landline phone from the wall. I turned my cell phone off completely and dropped it in a drawer. I wanted silence. I needed it. By noon I was sure it was over. They were married. My son was now legally bound to a woman who despised me. A woman who would spend the rest of her life slowly, methodically, poisoning him against me. I felt a wave of despair so profound it made me nauseous. I had lost. But then a car screeched into my driveway. I looked out the window to see my sister Karen's car, parked haphazardly, halfway on the lawn. She practically fell out of the driver's side, still in her lavender dress, and ran to my front door, pounding on it with both fists. Sarah, open up. You have to hear this, she screamed through the door. Hesitantly, I unlocked it. She burst in, her face a chaotic mix of shock, fury, and something that looked bizarrely like glee. You're not going to believe this, she gasped, leaning against the door to catch her breath. Karen, what is it? I asked, my heart starting to pound a frantic rhythm. The wedding, she said, her words tumbling out in a rush. It's not happening. It's over. Sarah, it's all falling apart. Chloe, she's been exposed. In front of everyone. Exposed? What are you talking about? And then Karen told me everything. The story was so wild, so dramatic, it sounded like something from a bad television movie. But it was real. It turned out Ethan's best man, Ben, a wonderful young man who'd been like a second son to me, had been up late the night before, unable to sleep. Around 2 a.m. he received an anonymous email. The subject line was just one word. Chloe. Ben, a cautious guy, almost deleted it, thinking it was spam or a virus. But something made him open it. Inside there was no text, just a series of photographs clear as day. They were pictures of Chloe from 2 weeks prior, on what she had called a marketing conference in Chicago. She was wrapped in the arms of another man, kissing him passionately outside a swanky hotel. The man was her boss, the one she always gushed about, the one whose approval she seemed to crave more than anything. The email came from a disposable address, but the sender had written a single line at the bottom. She stepped on a lot of good people to get her last promotion. Your friend deserves to know who he's really marrying before he makes a mistake he can't undo. Karen later found out it was from a young woman at Chloe's company, a junior marketer whose brilliant ideas Chloe had stolen for a major campaign, leading to a big win for Chloe and getting the other girl completely sidelined. It was an act of pure revenge. Ben was horrified. He felt like he was holding a grenade. What was he supposed to do? Ruin his best friend's wedding day, the happiest day of his life? Or let him marry a cheater, a liar? He paced his hotel room all night, feeling sick. He was about to convince himself to stay quiet, to just delete the email and pretend he never saw it, when Karen, after leaving my house in a fury, had called him. She told him what Chloe had said to me word for word. That was the final straw for Ben. He told Karen later that in that moment, he realized this wasn't just a single mistake Chloe had made. It was part of a pattern of cruelty and deception. He knew he couldn't let his friend walk into that trap. At 10:30 a.m., half an hour before the ceremony, Ben burst into the small room where Ethan was nervously adjusting his tie. Without a word, he just handed Ethan his phone. Karen said Ethan's face drained of all color. He staggered back as if he'd been physically struck, his breath coming in ragged gasps. In that single horrifying moment, everything clicked into place. All the little red flags he had chosen to ignore for years, Chloe's secretive texts, the late nights at the office, her obsession with his future salary as a lawyer, her coldness towards me. It all made a terrible kind of sense. But it got worse. As this truth bomb was going off in the groom's room, another one was smoldering in the pews. Chloe's own maid of honor, her cousin, had had a little too much champagne that morning to calm her nerves. She'd let slip to another bridesmaid that the family was in deep financial trouble, and that they were all counting on this wedding to solve their problems. The word spread like wildfire through the guests. Ethan, shaking with a righteous rage I had never seen in him, stormed to the bridal suite. Karen said the door flew open with a bang. He threw the phone at Chloe. She saw the pictures and for the first time her perfect mask of composure completely shattered. "It's not what it looks like," she stammered, her voice high and shrill. "It's exactly what it looks like," Ethan roared, his voice echoing through the room. "And you know what the worst part is? It's not even this affair. It's that you looked my mother in the eye last night and you tried to cut her out of my life. You tried to erase the one person who has ever truly been there for me." He turned and walked out, leaving her stunned and exposed in her $1,000 gown. He walked straight down the main aisle of the church, past all the whispering guests, stood at the altar alone, and took the microphone from the shocked pastor. His voice, shaking but firm, boomed through the silent church. "There will be no wedding today," he announced. "This marriage is built on lies and betrayal. I'm sorry you all came here for nothing. It's over. Now you'd think that would be the end of it, right? The villain gets exposed, justice is served, and everyone moves on. But with people like Chloe, humiliation isn't an end. It's just fuel for a new kind of war. And I was about to become her #1 target." The chaos that followed was immediate and spectacular, according to Karen. Chloe's mother shrieked like a banshee. Her father, Richard, turned a shade of purple Karen had never seen before. Guests were flooding out of the church, murmuring in shocked disbelief, pulling out their phones to text the news. But I didn't know any of that yet. I just knew my son wasn't getting married to that woman. And a wave of relief so powerful it made me dizzy washed over me. I finally allowed myself to cry, but these were tears of gratitude, not grief. That relief was short-lived. By that evening the war had begun. And it was being fought on a battlefield I didn't understand, social media. Chloe posted a photo on her Instagram. It was a professionally taken shot of her in her wedding dress from a fitting, but she had expertly smudged her mascara to make it look like she'd been crying for hours. The caption was a masterpiece of manipulation. A work of fiction so compelling it could have won an award. "My heart is utterly shattered," it read. "I was ready to commit my life to the man I love, but I never realized the biggest obstacle to our happiness would be the jealousy and control of his own mother. She has been poisoning our love from the start. Some people just can't let go. Please respect my privacy during this devastating time." It was brilliant. And it worked. The comments flooded in. Hundreds of them, then thousands. Strangers, people who knew nothing about me or my life, were calling me a monster. "What a jealous old hag. I feel so sorry for you, sweetie. That mother-in-law sounds evil. She deserves to be alone for the rest of her life for ruining her son's happiness out of pure spite." I felt sick to my stomach, physically ill. I, who had spent my life protecting my son, was now being painted as the villain who destroyed him in a global court of public opinion. Ethan, who was staying with Ben, called me, his voice ragged. "Mom, please don't look at it. It's just noise. It's lies. The people who matter know the truth." But the problem was her lies were reaching thousands of people, while the truth was confined to a small circle of friends and family. Then things got personal. And much, much uglier. A few days later I got a call from Brenda, my old nursing supervisor at the Cleveland Clinic, a dear friend who I'd worked with for almost 40 years before I retired. "Sarah," she said, her voice hesitant and troubled. "I'm not trying to meddle, but I thought you should know. We received a phone call today in HR. It was from a young woman who identified herself as a concerned friend of your son's. She was asking some very strange questions about your employment history. My blood ran cold. What kind of questions, Brenda? She was asking if there had ever been any disciplinary actions or complaints filed against you. If you were considered emotionally stable during your tenure. She was hinting that you had a history of being controlling with younger nurses and causing interpersonal conflicts. Sarah, it was disgusting. I told her you were one of the finest, most compassionate nurses we ever had, and that if she ever called again with such slander, I'd report her for harassment. But I wanted you to know. She's trying to dig up dirt on you, or invent it if she can't find it. It was Chloe. I knew it was. She wasn't just attacking my character online. She was trying to poison my past, to tarnish the one thing I had that was all my own. My professional legacy and a lifetime of dedicated service. The thought of her slandering my name at the hospital where I'd held the hands of dying patients and comforted grieving families, it made me see red. And then the final blow came. A week after the canceled wedding, a certified letter arrived in my mailbox. The envelope was thick and bore the letterhead of a prestigious and notoriously aggressive downtown law firm. My hands trembled as I tore it open. It was a formal cease and desist letter, followed by a notice of intent to sue. They were threatening to sue me, for defamation of character, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and, I'll never forget this phrase, tortious interference with contractual relations. They were claiming that my malicious campaign of lies against Chloe had caused Ethan to call off the wedding, resulting in massive financial and emotional damages. They were demanding a settlement of $250,000 to avoid a lengthy and public court battle. I sank into my kitchen chair, the papers shaking in my hand. It was absurd. It was insanity. I hadn't done anything. I had simply stayed home. But they had twisted my silent act of self-preservation into an act of war. They knew I was a retired nurse living on a fixed income and my savings. A lawsuit like this, even a frivolous one, could ruin me. It could force me to sell my house, drain my pension, destroy everything I had worked for my entire life. They weren't just trying to silence me. They were trying to annihilate me. I felt cornered, helpless like a mouse in a trap. That night, sleep was impossible. I paced the floors of my silent house. What could I do? Where could I even begin to fight something like this? I needed documents, financial statements, proof of my meager income to show a lawyer. I went down to the dusty basement, just looking for old financial papers, and my hand brushed against a cardboard box I hadn't opened since my husband's funeral 28 years ago. The basement was my husband's domain. After he died, I rarely went down there, except to do laundry or store Christmas decorations. It was cool and dry, smelling of old paper, cedar, and faint lingering memories. The box my hand had touched was tucked away on a high shelf, covered in a thick gray blanket of dust. On the side, in my husband's neat, precise handwriting, it just said, H&M Accounting Closed Files. My husband, Mark, had been a forensic accountant, a profession I never fully understood, but I knew it involved finding the truth hidden in long columns of numbers. He was a quiet, meticulous man who saw stories in numbers that no one else could. He used to say, "People lie, Sarah, but the ledgers never do." He'd passed away so suddenly from a heart attack, leaving a void in my life that never truly healed. Opening this box felt like disturbing a sacred tomb, a violation of his memory, but the desperation I felt was a physical thing, a weight on my chest that made it hard to breathe. With a heavy heart, I pulled down a rickety stepladder, climbed up and dragged the heavy box down. I set it on the old wooden workbench under the single dim light bulb that hung from the ceiling. The tape was yellowed and brittle with age. I peeled it back, and the musty smell of aged paper filled the air. Inside were dozens of beige folders, each labeled with a client's name from his old two-man practice. I was just looking for our own financial records, old tax returns, anything to prepare for the legal battle ahead. I started flipping through them, my mind a million miles away, lost in worry. Abbott Construction, Miller's Bakery, St. James Church. And then I saw it. A folder thicker than the rest. The name on the tab made my breath catch in my throat. Hayes Development Corporation, Richard Hayes. Richard Hayes. Chloe's father. My heart started to beat a frantic rhythm against my ribs. What was this? Couldn't be a coincidence. The world wasn't that small. I knew her father was in real estate, but I had no idea Mark had ever worked for him. I carefully lifted the folder out. It was heavy, filled to bursting. I opened it on the workbench, and dust motes danced in the dim light of the single bare bulb overhead. It wasn't just tax returns. It was a complete forensic audit. Years of it. Mark's notes were scribbled all over the margins in his familiar blue ink, sharp and analytical. I wasn't an accountant, but even I could understand what I was seeing. The story the numbers told was ugly. I saw photocopied checks made out to shell corporations with addresses that were just P.O. boxes. I saw wildly inflated invoices for construction materials that were never delivered. I saw loan applications to banks that listed properties and assets that simply didn't exist. It was a sprawling, complex web of deceit. And then, tucked into a sleeve at the back, was a smaller, separate file. On the tab, Mark had written 2 words in red ink, and underlined them twice. Bankruptcy fraud? Inside was a collection of documents from a corporate bankruptcy Richard Hayes had filed about 10 years ago. Mark's notes were sharper here, more urgent. He had highlighted sections, drawn arrows, and circled figures. He had meticulously traced how Richard Hayes had systematically transferred valuable assets, properties, and large sums of cash to his wife's name, and to offshore accounts in the months leading up to the bankruptcy filing. He had created a paper trail that showed, beyond any doubt, that he had hidden millions while claiming to be broke, thereby defrauding his creditors, his investors, and the government. My hands were shaking so hard I had to set the papers down. This was more than just shady business. This was criminal. Chloe hadn't just come from a family that was in a bit of financial trouble. She came from a family of professional crooks. They had built their entire lavish lifestyle on a foundation of lies and deceit. Suddenly, the whole wedding, Chloe's desperation for the marriage to go through, her obsession with Ethan's career, the ridiculous lawsuit, it all snapped into focus with terrifying clarity. This was never about love. It was a business deal. It was a divorce-proof acquisition. My son, with his promising career as a lawyer and his clean, respectable name, wasn't a fiancé. He was their next Mark. He was their bailout plan. They were going to latch onto his future salary and drain him dry, just like they had done to everyone else. I sat there on a dusty stool in my basement, surrounded by the ghosts of my husband's work. It felt like he was there with me, a comforting presence in the gloom, guiding my hand. He had left me a map, a detailed blueprint of their corruption. This wasn't just a shield to defend myself against their lawsuit anymore. This was a sword. My late husband had always told me, "The numbers don't lie, Sarah." And these numbers were screaming. They weren't just a defense, they were an attack. And I knew exactly who I needed to call. The next morning I felt like a different woman. The fear that had been my constant companion for over a week was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I called my friend Linda, who had been a paralegal at a respected family law practice for 30 years. She was smart, tough, and had seen everything. I met her at her office before it even officially opened, the dusty folder from my husband's files sitting between us on her polished conference table like a ticking bomb. "Linda," I said, my voice steady for the first time in days. "I think I've found something. Something big." For the next hour, she meticulously went through the documents, putting on a pair of reading glasses and examining each page with a trained eye. I watched her eyebrows climb higher and higher. Her professional calm gave way to stunned disbelief. Occasionally, she would let out a low whistle or murmur, "Oh, you've got to be kidding me." Finally, she took off her glasses and looked at me, her eyes wide. "Sarah, this is dynamite," she breathed. "Your husband was a brilliant accountant. This is a clear-cut case of bankruptcy fraud. The statute of limitations for criminal charges might be tricky, but the pattern of behavior it establishes is damning. It shows a history of deceit. This blows their lawsuit out of the water. They're accusing you of defamation? This proves that what you would say about them is the truth, and the truth is an absolute defense." "There's more," I said, pushing the threatening letter from Chloe's lawyer across the table. Linda read it, her lips thinning into a hard line. "This is pure intimidation. Tortious interference. They're accusing you of ruining their financial scheme. The audacity is breathtaking." She shook her head. "They're bullies, Sarah. They thought you were a scared old woman they could steamroll. They picked the wrong person." Then she leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with a sudden sharp thought. Sarah, did Ethan ever actually sign a prenuptial agreement with this woman? My heart sank. I think so. She was very insistent on it. Ethan thought it was just a formality, some rich people thing to protect her family assets. He was so in love he probably would have signed anything. Get me a copy of it, Linda said, her voice urgent. If her father is this crooked, I can guarantee you that prenup is not what it seems. I have a feeling his greed didn't stop 10 years ago. That evening was one of the most difficult conversations I've ever had. I had to call Ethan and explain the situation. He was still reeling from the betrayal, trying to piece his life back together while staying at Ben's apartment. When I told him their family was suing me, I heard a string of curses on his end of the line that I'd never heard him use before. His pain quickly turned to a protective fury. He found the document on his laptop and emailed it to me immediately. I forwarded it straight to Linda's personal email. An hour later my phone rang. It was Linda. She wasn't calm. She was practically shouting into the phone. I have never, in my 30 years of working in family law, seen a document so utterly predatory, she said, her voice vibrating with outrage. This isn't a prenup, Sarah. It's a financial execution. It's grand theft disguised as a legal document. She started reading clauses aloud to me over the phone. It stipulated that in the event of a divorce for any reason, Chloe would be entitled to 60% of Ethan's gross income for the next 15 years, regardless of how long they were married. It assigned sole ownership of the house he had just bought, the house I had given him my life savings to help with the down payment for, entirely to her. It even had a clause about any future inheritance he might receive from me, stating that half of any such inheritance would be immediately placed into a family trust that would be managed by her father, Richard Hayes. They weren't just planning to take his future salary, Linda explained, her voice thick with disgust. They were planning to take his past, your contribution to his house. They were planning to take his future, his earnings. And they were planning to take his legacy, the money you would leave him one day after a lifetime of hard work. They were going to bleed him dry and leave him with absolutely nothing. Just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, my phone beeped with an incoming call. It was Ethan. I told Linda I had to take it. His voice was tight with a new kind of panic. Mom, I think I'm in serious trouble at work, he said. He had just started his dream job as a junior associate at a prestigious law firm in downtown Cleveland. My supervising partner just called me into his office. He looked angry. He said he'd received a call from a prominent member of the business community, who warned him that I was involved in a messy and potentially scandalous domestic situation, and that the firm should be wary of associates who bring such drama to the workplace. He didn't say who it was, but I know it was him, Mom. It was Richard Hayes. He's trying to get me fired. That was it. That was the final line. They had threatened my financial security. They had attacked my reputation. They had tried to defraud my son. And now they were trying to destroy his career before it even began, the very career they were planning to plunder. This was no longer just about protecting myself. This was about saving my son from a pack of wolves. The fear was completely gone now, burned away by a righteous fury. They had pushed me into a corner. They had no idea I was about to come out fighting with the ghost of a brilliant accountant by my side. They wanted a war? They were about to get one. 2 days later the email arrived. It was from Richard Hayes himself, a masterpiece of false sincerity, addressed to both me and Ethan. He was inviting us to a private dinner for a quiet conversation at a fancy steakhouse downtown that was known for its dark wood paneling and exorbitant prices. He wrote about healing the unfortunate rift and finding an amicable path forward for the sake of the young people. It was so disingenuous it made my skin crawl. Don't go, Mom, Ethan said immediately over the phone. His voice was flat and tired. It's a trap. They're just going to try and manipulate us, play more mind games. I know, I said calmly, my voice harder than he was used to hearing. And we're going to walk right into it. But we're not going in empty-handed. We're going to end this tonight. That Friday night, I put on the pale blue dress I was supposed to have worn to the wedding. Felt different now. It wasn't a mother-of-the-groom dress anymore. Felt like battle armor. I met Ethan in the lobby of the restaurant. He looked exhausted, the stress of the last few weeks etched onto his face. But when he saw the look in my eyes, something shifted in his posture. He straightened his shoulders. We were a team. We were Millers. And we were done being victims. They were already there, seated at a large, circular booth in a private corner of the restaurant, a table clearly chosen for hushed, important conversations. Richard, Chloe, and her mother. A woman named Eleanor who looked like she was carved from ice. They were all smiles and fake pleasantries, a perfect portrait of a wealthy, concerned family. Sarah. Ethan. So glad you could make it, Richard boomed, standing to shake Ethan's hand with a warmth that was utterly chilling. Let's put this unfortunate business behind us. Water under the bridge. We sat down. The air was thick with unspoken tension, so heavy you could cut it with one of the steak knives on the table. For a few minutes we went through the motions of civility. A waiter came, we ordered drinks, and they made excruciating small talk about the weather. Then Richard cleared his throat and set down his fork, getting down to business. Now, he began in a smooth, condescending tone, as if he were explaining something to a child. About this lawsuit. It was simply a formality, a legal maneuver to encourage a dialogue. Obviously, we don't want to drag family through the courts. It's unseemly. We believe that if Ethan makes a simple public statement clarifying that the wedding was called off due to a mutual misunderstanding, and that Chloe is blameless in the matter, we can make this all go away. We can even be generous regarding the expenses for the cancelled wedding. Ethan started to speak, his voice tight with anger, but I placed a hand on his arm and gave him a look. Let me handle this. This was my fight. I reached into my handbag and pulled out a slim file folder. Not the whole dusty box, just a few key documents Linda had helped me copy and organize. I placed it on the crisp white tablecloth with a soft but definitive thud that seemed to echo in the booth. Before we discuss your generous offer, I said, my voice as cold and level as a frozen lake, I'd like to talk about a different misunderstanding. This one goes back about 10 years. Richard's practiced smile faltered. Chloe stiffened beside him, her knuckles white where she gripped her wine glass. I slid a single document across the table. It was a summary Linda had prepared, outlining the fraudulent asset transfers my husband had documented. Does Hayes Development Corporation bankruptcy? Case number 74B21 ring a bell, Richard? My husband was a very meticulous accountant. He kept excellent records of all his clients. He found it fascinating how you managed to transfer $3 million to an offshore account just 6 weeks before declaring you were completely broke. Richard Hayes's face went from tan to a pasty gray. His wife, Eleanor, let out a tiny strangled gasp. And then there's this, I continued, my voice never rising, never wavering. I slid the copy of the prenup on top of the bankruptcy file. I had highlighted the relevant clauses in bright yellow, so they couldn't be missed. Clause 14 subsection C. The one that assigns 60% of my son's future income to Chloe in case of a divorce. And my personal favorite, Clause 18, which grants a trust managed by you, Richard, control over half of any inheritance my son might receive from his mother's estate. Tell me, was this part of the amicable path forward you had in mind? The table was utterly silent. Even the ambient noise of the restaurant seemed to fade away. Chloe stared at me, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. The victim act was gone. You have no idea what you're talking about, Richard finally stammered, his bravado completely gone. Oh, I think I do, I said, leaning forward, looking each of them in the eye. You're broke. You have been for years. You saw my son, a kind, trusting man with a brilliant career ahead of him, and you saw a lifeline. You weren't planning a marriage. You were planning a hostile takeover of his life. You threatened me, you tried to ruin my reputation at the hospital where I worked for 40 years, and you tried to get my son fired from his job, all to protect your disgusting little scheme. That's when Ethan finally spoke. He wasn't looking at Richard. He was looking directly at Chloe, his voice shaking with a pain so deep it broke my heart. Was any of it real? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. The last 3 years. Was a single moment of it real? For a second, Chloe's mask cracked. She looked desperate. She reached for his hand across the table. Ethan, please, it got complicated, but I do love you. I do. Ethan pulled his hand away as if he'd been burned. No, he said, and his voice was suddenly strong. He stood up. You don't. You don't know the first thing about love. You tried to take my future, and you tried to erase my past." He looked at me, and his eyes were filled with a new fierce clarity. "Let's go, Mom." We stood up and walked away. Chloe started shouting after us, her voice no longer smooth and silky, but a desperate, shrill sound that made heads turn all over the restaurant. "You'll regret this. You old witch, you'll regret this. You've ruined everything." Richard was just sitting there, staring at the papers on the table, a ruined man. As we walked out of that restaurant and into the cool Ohio night, I thought the war was over. I thought we had won. But Chloe was about to make one last, desperate attack. A move that would backfire on them in the most public and humiliating way imaginable. The feeling of walking out of that restaurant was something I'll never forget. It was a victory, clean and absolute. For the first time in weeks, Ethan was smiling a real smile, one of genuine relief. The weight of Chloe's deception had finally been lifted from his shoulders. We got into my car, and for a moment we just sat there in silence. Then he reached over and took my hand. "Thank you, Mom," he said. "You saved me." I squeezed his hand back, my heart full. We thought we had won. We thought it was over. We were naive. We had exposed them to their faces, but we had underestimated their shamelessness, their absolute refusal to accept defeat. The very next afternoon, my sister Karen called me, her voice practically buzzing with fury. "Sarah, you need to look at the Talk of the Town section of the local paper's website. Right now." The Talk of the Town was a notorious local gossip column. A cheap online publication known for its sensationalism and a complete disregard for facts. My heart sank as I typed the address into my computer. And there it was. A big, unflattering photo of me, probably taken from my social media page years ago, next to a glamorous, tearful-looking headshot of Chloe. The headline was designed for maximum damage. Jealous mother-in-law's cruel campaign sabotages son's dream wedding. The article was a complete fabrication. A work of pure fiction. It quoted sources close to the heartbroken bride, who claimed I had been poisoning Ethan against Chloe for years, that I was a bitter, controlling woman who couldn't stand to see her son happy with another woman. It painted Chloe as a tragic victim of a classic case of maternal jealousy, and portrayed me as a vindictive monster. Chloe had sold her sob story to the one outlet that wouldn't bother with fact-checking, paying them to print her version of events. She had taken the fight public. My first reaction was a white-hot fury. My second was a chilling wave of despair. How could we fight this? Her lies were now in print, for the entire city to see, preserved forever on the internet. Ethan was devastated, but not for himself. For me. "This is my fault, Mom," he said, his voice heavy with guilt when he called. "I brought this person into our lives. I exposed you to this." "No," I told him, a new kind of fire igniting inside me, burning away the despair. "This is not your fault. And this is not over." Chloe had made a critical, fatal mistake. By putting this story out in the open, by trying to shame me publicly, she had given me permission to do the same. The difference was I had the truth on my side. And I had evidence. I looked at the folder of my husband's documents, still sitting on my coffee table. I thought about the predatory prenup. I thought about the call to Ethan's boss. She wanted a public fight? Fine. But we weren't going to fight in the mud of a gossip column. We were going to fight in the light of day. I called Linda. "Linda," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "That lawsuit they threatened us with is garbage, right?" "Completely," she confirmed. "It's a scare tactic. They'd be laughed out of court." "Good," I said. "Because I'm not interested in defending myself anymore. I want to go on the offensive. Do you know any real journalists? Not gossip columnists. I'm talking about someone who actually investigates things. Someone who cares about the truth." Linda was silent for a moment. Then she said, "I might. There's a guy at the plane dealer, Tom Fitzpatrick. He's a bulldog. He's been there for 30 years. Specializes in financial crimes and public corruption. He's tough as nails, but he's fair. He doesn't bend for anyone. Let me make a call. I can't promise anything, but I can get you in the room with him." 2 hours later, I was sitting in a small sterile meeting room at the newspaper's headquarters downtown. The room felt cold and impersonal. Tom Fitzpatrick was an older man with tired eyes, a rumpled suit, and a coffee-stained tie, but when he looked at you, you felt like he could see right through you. I had brought Ethan with me. We were in this together. For the next hour, I laid out the entire story from beginning to end. My voice was steady. I started with Chloe's whisper at the rehearsal dinner. I told him about the social media attacks, the malicious call to my old hospital, the attempt to get Ethan fired from his new job. Then I opened the folder. I pushed the evidence of the bankruptcy fraud across the table. I showed him the prenup, with Linda's notes in the margin explaining the predatory clauses in layman's terms. Ethan spoke next, his voice quiet but firm, detailing the emotional manipulation, the constant lies, the way Chloe had tried to isolate him from everyone he loved. Fitzpatrick listened intently, not saying a word, just making occasional notes on a legal pad. He examined the documents, his eyes scanning the pages with an unnerving focus. He looked at my husband's meticulous notes. He read the prenup and a muscle twitched in his jaw. When we were done, he leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers. He looked from me to Ethan, then back to the pile of documents that represented years of deceit. He was silent for a long, heavy moment. Then he looked me right in the eye. "Mrs. Miller," he said, his voice a low gravel. "This isn't just a family drama anymore. The gossip column got the headline wrong. The story isn't about a jealous mother. It's about financial predation. It's a story my readers need to hear." I felt a tear slide down my cheek, but for the first time in a long time, it wasn't a tear of sadness or fear. It was a tear of pure, unadulterated hope. The week that followed was agonizingly slow. Every day, I expected to see another attack from Chloe in the gossip pages. Another lie. Another twisted version of the story designed to discredit me before the truth could come out. But there was nothing. Just an eerie silence. It was the calm before the storm. Tom Fitzpatrick and his team at the newspaper were methodical, relentless. They weren't just taking my word for it, they were verifying everything. They had their own legal team vetting every document my husband had created. They had researchers digging into public records, pulling every property deed, every business filing, every lawsuit associated with Richard Hayes and his web of shell corporations. They were building a case piece by piece that was ironclad and undeniable. Tom called me a few times to clarify small details, his questions sharp and precise. It was nerve-wracking, but it was also reassuring. He was taking this seriously. Then, on a Sunday morning, it happened. Karen called me before I was even out of bed, her voice electric with excitement. "Sarah, get the paper. The front page. Get it now." My hands trembled as I walked out to my front porch in my robe. And there it was. The Sunday edition of the Plain Dealer, the biggest paper of the week, the one everyone in Northeast Ohio read. The headline was in huge, bold letters splayed across the top of the page, right above the fold. It was impossible to miss. The wedding plot. Prominent developer Richard Hayes accused of predatory scheme targeting future son-in-law in marriage contract. It was all there. Everything. Tom Fitzpatrick hadn't just written an article. He had written a meticulous, devastating indictment. The story laid out the whole sordid affair in painstaking detail. It started with the canceled wedding and the photos of Chloe's affair, immediately lending credibility to the narrative of deceit. But it quickly pivoted to the real story, the money. The article detailed the Hayes family's long history of financial troubles, using my husband's audit files as a roadmap and citing him by name as a respected forensic accountant. It explained the bankruptcy fraud in clear, simple terms that anyone could understand. It published direct, damning excerpts from the predatory prenup, exposing the clauses designed to strip Ethan of his future earnings, his house, and his inheritance. Tom had even found and interviewed 2 other small business owners who had been financially ruined by Richard Hayes in the past, their stories echoing our own. My story, my pain, was the human element that tied it all together. They quoted me about Chloe's whisper, about her calling me baggage. My voice was finally being heard. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for the Hayes family. It was a local story that had everything: sex, money, betrayal, a villainous high society family, and a heroic single mother. It was picked up by national news outlets and morning talk shows. The state attorney general's office, citing the article, announced they were opening a formal investigation into Richard Hayes for bankruptcy fraud and other financial crimes. The bank that held the mortgage on their lavish home in Hunting Valley started foreclosure proceedings. Their country club membership was indefinitely suspended. They became pariahs overnight. The online comments, the ones that had once been so cruel to me, now turned their collective venom on Chloe and her family. The shift was dizzying. Gold digger, plain and simple. I hope she gets nothing. That poor mother. To be treated like that after raising her son all by herself. She's a hero. I hope the dad goes to jail. What a creep. And the daughter is just like him. The sympathy that had been denied me poured in from all corners. Old friends I hadn't seen in years called to offer their support and apologize for ever doubting me. Former patients from the hospital sent cards and flowers. The most touching thing was when strangers would stop me at the grocery store or the post office. "You're Sarah Miller, aren't you?" they'd ask quietly. And when I'd nod, they'd say, "I read about what happened. Good for you for standing up to them. You gave them what they deserved." It was overwhelming. It was vindicating. But it was also deeply sad. I had never wanted to destroy a family, to see their lives dismantled in such a public way. I had just wanted to protect my own. The lawsuit against me was quietly and unceremoniously dropped. The threats stopped. The silence from the Hayes family was absolute. It was as if they had vanished from the face of the earth, consumed by the firestorm they themselves had started. That Sunday, with the damning newspaper spread out on my kitchen table, should have felt like the ultimate victory. And in many ways it was. The truth was out. My name was cleared. My son was safe. But the real victory, the one that truly mattered, wasn't about the downfall of my enemies. It was about the rebuilding of my family, a family of two that had been shaken to its very core. And that process, I knew, was just beginning. In the quiet months that followed, the noise finally faded away. The headlines moved on to other scandals, and the Hayes family disappeared from public life. I heard through the grapevine from my sister Karen, who heard it from a friend, that they sold their house for a fraction of its worth to avoid the foreclosure and moved somewhere down south, leaving a trail of debts and disgrace behind them. I felt no joy in their ruin, no sense of victorious gloating. I just felt a profound sense of relief, like a patient whose fever has finally broken, leaving them weak but lucid for the first time in a long while. The real work was happening not in the newspapers or the court of public opinion, but in the quiet, gentle moments inside my little house. Ethan and I had to find our way back to each other. The betrayal he had suffered was immense, and it had left deep scars on his soul. He had loved Chloe, or at least he had loved the idea of her that she had so expertly crafted. He was going to therapy, something I was so proud of him for doing, trying to understand how he could have been so blind, how he had allowed her to isolate him from me, little by little, over 3 years. He threw himself into his work, not with the frantic, status-seeking ambition Chloe had demanded of him, but with a new, quiet sense of purpose. He started taking on pro bono cases at his firm, spending 1 day a week helping people who couldn't afford a lawyer navigate things like eviction notices and custody disputes. "I want to protect people from predators like them, Mom," he told me once over dinner. "People who use the law and money to hurt, not to help." In the ashes of his heartbreak, I saw the good man I had raised emerging from the wreckage, stronger, more compassionate, and wiser than before. Our relationship, which had been strained and formal for so long, began to heal. It wasn't an overnight fix. It was a slow, deliberate rebuilding of trust and intimacy. We started having Sunday dinners again, a tradition we had let slide during his time with Chloe. It became our sacred time. We'd cook together, sometimes making his childhood favorites, and we'd talk for hours. We didn't talk about Chloe or the past anymore, we didn't need to. We talked about everything else. His challenging cases, my blooming garden, a funny movie we'd both seen. We were rediscovering the simple, easy bond we had always shared before she came into our lives. One rainy Saturday afternoon in the fall, Ethan came over unannounced. He was carrying something wrapped in a cloth. He sat down next to me on the couch and unwrapped it. It was the blue leather scrapbook. My heart gave a little lurch. I hadn't seen it since I'd shoved it under my bed on that terrible night. I thought he might have thrown it away. "I found this under your bed a while ago," he said softly, his eyes filled with an emotion I couldn't quite read. "I guess you never gave it to her." "No," I said quietly. "She made it clear she didn't want it." He opened it on his lap. We spent the next hour turning the pages together. It was different this time. It wasn't just my memories anymore, it was ours. We laughed at his goofy elementary school pictures, the one with the missing front teeth. He told me stories I'd never heard about his high school friends and the trouble they used to get into. We grew quiet when we reached the photos from his law school graduation. "I was so proud of you that day," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion as I remembered the feel of his robe, the weight of his achievement. "You were always proud of me," he said, his own voice cracking. "Even when I didn't deserve it." "Mom, I am so sorry." "For what, honey?" I asked, though I knew. My heart ached for the pain he was still carrying. For not seeing it. For not listening to my own gut when it told me something was off. For letting her get between us. For every time I took her side or didn't defend you. She almost made me forget who my real family was. He turned to the very back of the album. I saw that he had added a new page. Taped carefully onto the thick, pristine paper was a single photograph I hadn't seen in years. It was a faded picture from decades ago, of a young me, looking tired but happy, holding a tiny baby Ethan wrapped in a blue blanket. We were both laughing into the camera. Beneath it, in his neat, strong handwriting, he had written a single sentence. "My first home, my best friend, my only family. Always." Tears streamed down my face as I read the words, washing away the last remnants of the hurt. He pulled me into a hug, a real one, the kind he used to give me when he was a little boy. I held on to my son, my boy, my entire world. In the warmth of his embrace, all the pain and anger of the past year finally melted away, replaced by a love that was pure and unbreakable. We had been through the fire, and we had come out the other side, not unscathed but whole. And together. That was the only victory that ever truly mattered. But there was one last thing I felt I needed to do, not for me and not for Ethan, but for anyone else who might be listening to a story like this and feeling alone in their own battle. Life after the storm found a new, quieter rhythm. It's funny how you don't realize how much noise you've been living with until it's gone. The constant, low-level anxiety of dealing with Chloe, the walking on eggshells, the feeling of being an outsider in my own son's life, it had become my normal. Now the silence in my house is peaceful again, not lonely. The blue dress I never wore to the wedding? I donated it to a charity that provides formal wear for underprivileged young women. It was a beautiful dress, and I hoped it would bring someone else a joy it could never bring me. The scrapbook sits on my coffee table now, a proud centerpiece, a reminder not of what we almost lost, but of the bedrock we are built on. Ethan is thriving. It's a joy to watch. He's become an exceptional lawyer, respected for his integrity and his fierce dedication to his clients. He's dating again, taking it slow this time. He's seeing a lovely woman, a second-grade teacher who is kind and warm, and whose eyes light up when she talks about her students. When she comes over for Sunday dinner, she asks me to tell her stories about Ethan when he was little. She listens with genuine interest. It's such a small thing, but after years of being treated as an inconvenience, it means the world. She sees us as a package deal, a family, not a burden. Sometimes when I'm out in my garden, pulling weeds and tending to my roses, I think about Chloe and her family. I don't feel anger anymore. I don't feel hatred. I just feel a quiet pity for people who are so empty inside that they have to try and steal the lives and futures of others. Their story is one of taking, of deceit, of things that glitter but aren't gold. Our story, my story and Ethan's, is one of building. It's about the quiet, unseen labor of a mother's love. A foundation so strong that not even the most vicious storm can wash it away. I learned something powerful through all of this, something I want to share with you. For years, I thought my strength was in my sacrifice, in my ability to endure hardship silently for the sake of my son. I thought being a good mother meant swallowing my own pain to keep the peace. I was wrong. My true strength, the strength I never knew I had, was in finding my voice. It was in that moment I decided not to attend the wedding. It was in the moment I opened that dusty box in the basement. It was in the moment I sat across from those people who sought to destroy me and spoke the truth loud and clear. I'm telling you my story today not for sympathy, and not for praise. I'm telling it for the woman out there right now who is being made to feel small. For the mother who is being told she is baggage. For the wife who is being called crazy for suspecting something is wrong. For the sister, the daughter, the friend whose love and sacrifice is being taken for granted and treated like a doormat. Your intuition is real. Your value is immeasurable. Your sacrifices matter. Do not ever let anyone, no matter who they are, erase you from your own story. You are the one holding the pen. Write your own ending. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. It means more than you know to be able to share it with this community. My question for you all is this. Have you ever had to find your voice and stand up to a family member who was trying to push you out or diminish your worth? I would be honored to read your experiences in the comments below. Let's support each other and share our strength. And if my story resonated with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more true stories from people just like us. Please remember, you are not alone.